On a remote farm in the mountains, Clara, a woman in her 30s with a sun-streaked face and a watchful eye, led a peaceful life in harmony with her horses. Those animals were more than her companions. They were her family. After losing her parents and deciding to live in isolation, Clara found a kind of refuge with her horses. Over the last few nights, however, something had been altering the routine calm of the farm. Clara woke up startled, hearing sounds coming from the stable. It was a persistent neighing, an unusual commotion, as if the horses were frightened. Trying to understand, she got up and went to the stable with a flashlight, but everything seemed in order as soon as she arrived. The horses watched her with wide eyes and tense bodies, but calmed down when they sensed her presence. One of the following mornings, Clara, tired from the interrupted night, commented to her closest neighbor, an elderly man named João, who lived a few kilometers away, about the horse's restless behavior. João, with his suspicious manner, warned her, "Clara, this farm is very isolated. It could just be a wild animal prowling around, but keep an eye out. Sometimes the silence of the mountains hides more than meets the eye." Clara tried to follow João's advice and rationalize the situation. Perhaps it really was some nocturnal animal that was haunting the property, a wolf or a fox. But the persistent feeling that there was something strange bothered her. That night, she decided to go on a patrol before bed. She went past the stables, checked the doors, and looked closely at her horses. Estrella, her favorite mare, approached, lightly nudging Clara's shoulder with her muzzle. Clara smiled, stroking the mare's soft mane. "Are you scared, girl?" she whispered, trying to reassure Estrella. But the mare's eyes were fixed on the darkness beyond the stable, and for a moment, Clara also felt a chill. Something made her think that perhaps she wasn't as alone as she had imagined. On her way home, Clara looked back one last time, observing the shadow of the stable in the pale moonlight. The next morning, Clara woke up early, still feeling a strange discomfort that had settled in since the night before. She went to the stable and, as she approached the entrance, she stopped abruptly. There was something on the ground that hadn't been there the day before, footprints in the damp earth, trails that circled the stable and headed towards the field. She bent down to examine the footprints more closely. They were large, and the arrangement of the marks showed that whoever it was had walked slowly, as if observing the area. Estrella, the mare who had always been so calm, neighed restlessly, pulling Clara away from the footprints. Clara watched her for a moment, surprised by the intensity of the mare's behavior. Since she had raised her, she had never seen her so insistent. Estrella pushed Clara with her muzzle, leading her away from the stable as if to protect her from something. Noticing the tension in the other horse's eyes, Clara muttered to herself, trying to keep calm. "It's all right, people. There's no one here." But inside, she knew she wasn't so sure. There was something very wrong with those footprints. The thought made her decide to reinforce security around the stable. She spent the day moving logs, stones, and improvising a sturdier fence. She closed every door and window, checking every detail. Later, while checking the surroundings, Clara found something that made her shudder: a silver bracelet tangled in a bush near the stable. The metal still shone in the light, and as she picked it up, she realized that the object looked new, as if it had been left there recently. He felt the weight of a more concrete concern settle on him. Someone had been there, and he hadn't just passed by her property. He seemed to be watching the stable and trying to get close to the horses. Clara took a deep breath and thought of John, remembering his warning. Perhaps she should have listened better to his advice and asked for help, but part of her stubborn nature made her decide that she would deal with this on her own. This was her home, her land. She wouldn't let anyone scare her and take away her peace. That night, Clara kept watch near the stable, but around 2 in the morning, the silence was broken by the restless sound of horses' hooves on the ground. Estrella was pulling again on the chains of the door to her room, tapping her hooves on the ground and looking directly at Clara. Her eyes were wide and she made a strange movement, as if to signal something. With her heart racing, Clara approached the mare, trying to calm her down. But Estrella insisted on pulling her away, her head repeatedly pointing in the direction of the field, where the footprints had been found. "What do you want to show me, Estrella?" Clara murmured, still unsure whether to follow the animal's instinct. Before she could make up her mind, a distant noise broke the silence. Clara froze, feeling her heart race. Footsteps. Someone was walking across the field, and the certainty that she was no longer alone became terrifying. Clara held the lantern tightly in one hand, while with the other she kept hold of Estrella's rein, who neighed softly, trying to pull her towards the woods. The cold night wind increased his apprehension, making each sound more threatening. She took a deep breath, trying to control the fear she felt growing with every step she took. The low, whispered voices coming from the forest were now unmistakable. Walking slowly, Clara hid behind a fallen log, pulling Estrella close. She spotted a flickering light between the trees, probably lanterns, and distinguished 3 figures moving in the darkness. She watched as the group stopped near a vehicle covered by branches, camouflaged in the vegetation. The voices were low, but Clara could hear fragments of the conversation. "We have to be quick. We need to cross the goods before dawn," said a male voice, hoarse and impatient. "Don't worry. This place is isolated. No one comes here," replied a second female voice, who seemed to be leading the group. A third, younger man sighed impatiently as he began unloading heavy boxes from the vehicle. Clara's eyes widened as she realized that they were removing suspicious-looking packages and hiding them under a tarpaulin on the forest floor. Every few moments, the figures looked around, on the lookout for any movement. Clara, trying to remain calm, retreated a few steps, determined to get back to the stable before she was discovered. Meanwhile, Estrella neighed softly, drawing the group's attention. Clara held her breath, her eyes widening as one of the men turned his flashlight towards her, illuminating the edge of the forest where she was hiding. "What was that?" asked the man, starting to walk in the direction of the sound. With no other choice, Clara pulled Estrella up and started running back towards the farm, the sound of rapid footsteps echoing behind her. Her heart was pounding and her mind was racing in search of a solution. She had to get to the stable and lock herself in, at least until dawn. When she reached the stable, Clara quickly closed the doors and locked herself in with the horses, trying to hear the sounds outside. Her chest rose and fell, her breathing panting. For a few minutes, everything was silent, and she began to believe that she had lost the group. But then the gruff man's voice rang out near the entrance to the stable. "Hey, I know you're in there. Open the door, and no one will get hurt." Clara held her breath, fear turning into a mixture of adrenaline and determination. She knew she was in danger, but she also knew that she couldn't allow these strangers to take control of her farm. Clara was paralyzed for a moment, her heart pounding hard. She looked around, trying to find a way out or a place to hide. She was trapped inside the stable, with the horses restless around her, sensing the tense atmosphere. "Hey!" shouted the hoarse voice outside, more threatening. "There's no point in hiding. We know you've seen enough. We just want to talk." Clara knew that this conversation would not end well for her. With trembling hands, she stroked Estrella's muzzle, who seemed to understand the situation, and once again pulled Clara towards the back exit door. With no alternative, Clara made up her mind. She needed to find out more about what was going on and make sure she could get out safely. But that would take patience and courage. Hiding near the side window, Clara continued to watch. She saw the 3 strangers more clearly this time as they walked back and forth, checking their surroundings and whispering among themselves. They were more worried than they had seemed before. She noticed that the woman, who seemed to be leading the group, was signaling the others to hurry. With quick movements, one of them picked up a box from the floor and took out some kind of communication equipment. Little by little, Clara began to understand what was going on. The strangers were using the forest to smuggle goods, hiding them in the darkness, probably taking advantage of the area's solitude and the difficulty of access. But the tense expression and constant glances in the direction of the farm made it clear that the group knew about the danger of being caught. She then had a moment of clarity. Her horses, especially Estrella, had been trying to warn her all along. All those restless nights made sense now. Clara felt a mixture of gratitude and urgency. She needed to report what she had discovered, but how could she do that without putting herself and the horses at risk? As she thought, she heard footsteps coming closer. The woman's voice sounded colder. "Come on, we'd better get to grips with this situation before dawn." Clara hid behind a pile of hay, her heart racing, and in one swift movement, took her cell phone out of her pocket. She tried to call the police, but there was no signal. Her desperation increased, but she took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. It was then that a dangerous idea struck her. She would wait for the strangers to get far enough away, and then head for the small hill at the back of the property, where the cell phone signal was usually better. But she knew she couldn't get there safely on her own. She would need Estrella's help. She carefully pulled the mare around, opened the back door of the stable, and whispered, "Come on, girl. You and me. We'll get out of this together." As soon as the two began to move in silence through the darkness, Clara felt determined. She knew that if she could get to the hill and alert the authorities, she might be able to save her farm, and maybe even something bigger than she could have imagined. Clara advanced through the darkness with steady steps, guided by Estrella, who seemed to understand the urgency of the situation. But her movements were careful and silent, fearful that any noise would alert the smugglers. Even so, the adrenaline made her hasten her pace, keeping an eye on her surroundings as she tried to reach the hill where there would be a cell phone signal. As soon as they reached the halfway point, a crash echoed through the farm. Clara turned quickly, her heart racing. The stable doors had been smashed in, and she heard rapid footsteps and angry voices. "She's escaped!" shouted the gruff man. "She's trying to rat us out! She won't get far!" Without wasting any more time, Clara quickly climbed onto Estrella's makeshift saddle, holding on tight as the mare shot off towards the hill. Estrella seemed to understand that they had to race against time, and her hooves sounded like hammers hitting the hard earth of the night. But the footsteps behind them were getting closer too. The smugglers wouldn't give up so easily. Clara looked back, seeing the lanterns swinging as the three of them advanced through the darkness, determined to reach the hill before her. She felt panic rising but kept her focus on the only chance she had. When she finally spotted the hill a few meters away, her cell phone beeped. A single signal point appeared. Trying to balance herself and hold the phone at the same time, she dialed the police with trembling fingers. "Police? This is Clara. I need help, please. I'm at the isolated farm in the mountains. There's a group smuggling goods. They're after me," she whispered in an urgent voice. "We've received your call, ma'am. We're sending a team. Stay safe and wait for reinforcements," replied the voice on the other end of the line. But Clara knew that waiting for reinforcements wouldn't be so easy. The men's footsteps were getting closer and closer. Estrella snorted nervously, and suddenly Clara had a risky idea. She needed to protect herself and make sure the criminals didn't reach her before the police arrived. With a last gasp of courage, she let go of Estrella, pushing the mare forward. "Go, Estrella! Take them away," she whispered, pushing her gently. The mare neighed and shot off through the woods, while the men, on seeing her, turned their attention to the fleeing horse. Two of the men ran after Estrella, distracted, but the woman stayed behind, realizing what Clara had done. Clara hid among the rocks on the hill, trying not to make a sound as she watched the woman approach, a look of cold anger on her face. "Very clever, but not clever enough," the woman muttered, with a menacing smile. Clara felt a chill. She knew she would have to face her pursuer and, with luck, gain a few more minutes until the police arrived. Darkness and silence surrounded Clara as she stood motionless between the rocks, feeling her heart beat like a drum. The woman walked slowly, searching every corner of the hill, her flashlight scanning the ground and the surrounding trees. Clara knew that if she was discovered, she wouldn't stand a chance. Estrella, on the run, had already lost the other men who were still chasing the mare. Clara smiled internally as she imagined her companion's bravery, but then turned her attention to the imminent danger. With a calculated move, she picked up a nearby stone and threw it towards the trees, hoping that the sound would distract the woman. The distraction worked. The woman stopped, turning sharply in the direction of the noise, her eyes blazing with irritation. "Do you think you can play with me?" she muttered, taking firm steps to the opposite side. Seizing the moment, Clara quickly crawled to a larger rock, hiding while keeping her eyes fixed on the woman, who continued to look around. When Clara finally caught a glimpse of a gap in the darkness, she started down the hill, careful not to make any noise. Her heart leapt when she heard the sound of footsteps again, this time more distant, but unmistakable. Headlights cut through the darkness in the distance, and Clara almost sighed with relief when she saw the reflection of the police car's lights. The policemen got out of their vehicles quickly, flashlights in hand, moving cautiously through the area around the farm. Clara gathered up the last of her courage and ran up to the officers, waving to get their attention. "You've come! They're up there! They're smugglers! They're using my farm to hide goods," Clara said in a hurried whisper. The policeman in front, a tall man with a serious expression, nodded. "We've come prepared, ma'am. Stay here and let us take care of it." Clara watched as the group of policemen made their way up the hill, moving like shadows, strategically positioned. The silence was broken by shouts and orders as the policemen approached the group of smugglers. Clara watched attentively as the woman who had been chasing her started to run, but was quickly stopped. The other men, exhausted after the chase with Estrella, were captured soon after. Clara breathed a sigh of relief, feeling the weight of her fear and tension finally lift. She looked around, searching for Estrella. With hurried steps, she made her way to the stable, calling the mare's name. Then, from the middle of the trees, she heard a familiar neigh. Estrella came out of the darkness, her body sweaty and panting, but her eyes shining with satisfaction. Clara smiled and stroked the mare's neck. "You saved our lives, girl. We were a team today." The policeman returned, bringing the criminals in handcuffs. One of them approached Clara, removing his hat in a respectful gesture. "Thank you for having the courage to speak out, ma'am. It's not every day that you meet someone willing to take such a risk." Clara smiled, still caressing Estrella, and replied, "I didn't do it alone." The next morning, Clara watched the sun rise over the mountains, relief finally taking the place of fear. The police had spent the night searching the farm and the forest, seizing everything the smugglers had hidden and completely dismantling the scheme. She felt exhausted, but knew that her farm was finally safe again. Before leaving, the policeman leading the operation approached her and shook her hand firmly. "You were brave, Clara. And your mare, Estrella." I don't know how, but she seemed to know exactly what she was doing. Clara smiled, stroking Estrella's mane, who watched her with attentive and loyal eyes. She always knew, more than I did. It's as if she sensed the danger before any of us. With the criminals arrested and her farm at peace, Clara decided that she would no longer be alone. She opened the doors of her farm to children and young people from the region, teaching them how to look after horses and appreciate nature, just as Estrella had done for her.